Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed at Hitmix 88.9 WEIU.
Welcome to the Tales of Music and Film podcast. My name is DJ Apollo, and we have a very special recording planned for today. This is going to mark my 50th episode. And to tell you the truth, I cannot believe that I'm saying that right now. 50 episodes. And I could not be more proud with how far the show has come throughout the journey that we've had so far. The show is on the WEIU website, and it's also on Spotify Anchor, and I currently just hit 240 plays. I have many people who listen to the show. Like, I'm just absolutely mind blown, okay, with just like how big of a journey that it's been already. Like, I recently just got 32 brand new followers and my audience. So I want to read some statistics for you. As of right now, the numbers go like this for my podcast. Of the people listening in, 95% United States, we have 2% Canada, and then 1% for the United Kingdom, Denmark, South Africa, Mexico, and India. I never thought in a million years that my show would ever reach those kinds of places, you know? Just the fact that my show is getting picked up, you know, from all those other amazing places around the globe, I'm just absolutely starstruck. And I just cannot believe just like how amazing of a journey it's been. And I'm super excited today because to celebrate 50 episodes, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics of all time, Titanic. And of course, I am going to be reviewing the famous 1997 smash hit film Titanic, directed by James Cameron, and which is currently celebrating its 25th anniversary. And this film is said to be one of the greatest films ever made. It's actually one of the highest grossing films of all time. And I am very excited today to get into this movie. I've only seen this film twice, actually. I watched this film once. Now, I'm going to be dating myself very badly here, but the very first time that I watched this film was on a double VHS collector set. So I watched the movie for the very first time when I was around 7 or 8 years old, probably even younger, 6 or 7 years old. Anyway, I borrowed it from my grandma, and the movie was so long back then that they had to fit it onto 2 VHS tapes. And on the VHS tapes, the first tape ended right when Thomas Andrews is talking about how the ship only has an hour or two before she sinks due to the iceberg damage, and that's where it would cut. Then you'd have to put in the second tape. And I actually own it now. I actually have it in my VHS collection that I have. Yes, I collect VHS tapes. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I'm an old school kind of guy. But I am, of course, really dating myself because I know how a VHS tape works. Means like think about this, like the next couple of generations are probably they're not even gonna know like what a disc is, because everything's streaming. You know, the old days of putting in a VHS or putting a disc inside the disc player, it's like that those are going to be gone before you know it. But I have a lot of history with Titanic. Just to give you an idea, like my nickname growing up, like I'll never forget this. This is a very fond memory that I have. It goes like this. When I was a little kid, or when I was in 4th grade, a presentation was made for me and my other classmates in my class. My teacher was Miss Miller, and a presentation was made, and each kid got a nickname. And when it came up to be my turn, I was called Titanic Boy because I was so obsessed with the Titanic history, and it was all I would talk about. I rented out, I don't know how many books from my school library or the town library, which is right down the street from my house. I read, I don't know how many books, and then I watched dozens of Discovery Channel documentaries recounting the incident. I was completely obsessed with Titanic, and I still am to this very day. And to tell you the truth, like I was even talking with my friend Preston, which you all remember, he's been on the show many times in the past. I was telling him, it's like I've been obsessed with Titanic my whole life since I was a little kid. Until this day, I cannot explain why. You know, it's just one of those, like, I feel like I was there, even though I didn't physically walk on her decks. You know, like, I feel like I'm a part of the story in some way. You know, just I just like I just don't know. You know, it's just the craziest thing. It's like you get hooked on the most random things, and it's not a happy story in any way, shape, or form. But I find the story so crazy, you know, that it actually happened. But yeah, that's just to give you an idea. Like, I've read, I don't know how many books on the incident. I'm not like an historian by any means. I even went, when I was around 11 or 12 years old, I actually went to the Branson Museum, and I highly recommend, like, if you want to, if you ever go to Branson, I highly recommend that you check out that museum. It covers the history so well in the most respectable way, and it's a very beautiful museum. I actually am planning on going back there someday because at the time that I went, I was kind of too young, you know, at the time to really appreciate the history that they had. So I think this time I'd like to go back there and really, you know, take in what's being presented to me. But anyway, so that's kind of a little bit of history for you about me and Titanic. And to tell you the truth, just to add a little more detail for you, the reason why I got hooked was just like, I think it was one time when I was a little kid, I was walking through a classroom and I saw a Titanic book laying on a table and I got fascinated. And the first pictures that I saw was the wreck at the bottom of the Atlantic seafloor. And those shots of the ship, the way it looks now, all decayed and just broken, you know. Seeing the wreck fascinated me because little me was like, what happened, you know? And dude, watching the VHS or watching the old Discovery Channel documentaries on the incident, what always got me was the underwater submarine footage. Like, I just picture this, okay? The camera is going through the darkness of the sea with a little light attached on top of it, okay? It's just, and then out of nowhere, the hull of Titanic just merges from the darkness, and then you just see the whole ship outline sitting there, still on her main voyage, 110 years later. Every time the bow shows up out of the darkness, sitting right there, it gives me absolute chills every single time. And I don't know why. The hairs on my arms stand up every single time I see that. It's so haunting, you know? And it's just mesmerizing to see. You'd have to see it for yourself to fully understand, but that's some of my basic history about the incident, and I will go into more history here in a minute, but I'm going to name off a few little facts about the film. So to give you the plot, James Cameron's Titanic is an epic action-packed romance set against the ill-fated main voyage of the RMS Titanic, the pride and joy of the White Star Line, and at the time, the largest moving subject ever built. She was the most luxurious line of her era, the Ship of Dreams, she was called, which ultimately carried over 1,500 people to their death in the ice-cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean in the early hours of April 15, 1912. The movie was released on December 19, 1997. The film was on a budget of $200 million, and the film would go on to gross $2.247 billion, making it one of the biggest films of all time. The film was directed by the legendary James Cameron, who is one of my favorite directors of all time. He directed other films such as the first two Terminator films, Aliens, and the new Avatar films. And the movie features the song "My Heart Will Go On," which was performed and written by Celine Dion, who sang the song, and her lyrics and her performance was legendary. The song was composed by James Horner. A man named Will Jennings helped with the lyrics for the song, and it was produced by Horner. And I'm saying this right now, this song will make you cry. It plays during the ending credits for the movie, and it's going to rip your heart right out of your chest, and you will be bawling enough tears to fill the Atlantic Ocean, just to say. Like, dude, this film, 25 years later, it has the same impact. Like, I've watched a lot of people who do reaction videos of watching it for the first time. So many of them, the reaction ends with them completely in tears. I think that says something, you know, two and a half decades later, your film is still having the same impact. Like that just shows you how powerful this film is. It makes you really think about something. And before I go any further with the movie, I'm going to give you I'm going to try to see if I can contain myself, but whenever I talk about Titanic, I could go on for hours. So I'm going to try to see if I can give you a basic plot on why the ship was so remarkable and why the story was so big that it was turned into a movie twice. So Titanic was built by the White Star Line, and she was part of the Olympic class set of vessels designed by the White Star Line. The three vessels, you have Titanic, Britannic, and the Olympic. All three of them were built the exact same way. And Olympic was actually Titanic's twin, and Olympic was the only one out of the three ships not to sink. Britannic sank during World War I in 1915, I think it was, just a couple of years after Titanic. And Olympic did suffer some damage from an incident, but she survived, and the ship was retired in 1935, and she was scrapped, which was horrible, by the way, because the ship was built exactly the same way as Titanic. Like, the Olympic and Titanic looked so alike that there's actually theories that the ships are switched. And I don't know why that's a theory, but that's a famous theory that a lot of people have. They think the ships were switched. But anyway, the White Star Line made these three ships to fight other ship companies that were making faster ships. The White Star Line wanted to remind everybody that they were the top dog of making, you know, amazing vessels, and their stuff was top of the line, you know, stuff. So that's part of the reason why these ships were built. And Titanic obviously was the most famous out of all of them. Like, Titanic at the time was the biggest ship ever made. And just to give you an idea on how big the ship is, if I remember correctly, the ship was as long as around 3 football fields. And to give you an exact number, that's approximately 269 meters. And if the ship was standing from its bottom aiming upward, the ship would be slightly taller than the Empire State Building in New York City. And that's just to give you an idea. This ship was massive. And at the time of the incident, she was on her maiden voyage, and she was carrying 2,200 people. And this incident was a catastrophic event. Nobody would have imagined that an incident of this scale could ever have happened, but I often view Titanic as an incident of what happens to when people put way too much faith in technology to handle their problems. And the reason why the ship was so remarkable was that the White Star Line designed the ship to be unsinkable. Titanic was built with these watertight compartments. So the compartments were the rooms at the very bottom level of the ship where the coalmen were shoveling coal into the furnaces to run the engines, to make steam. And these compartments were these rooms that had these watertight doors built in. So in the event, if any of the rooms were breached, up to the first 4 compartments could be 100% be full with water, and Titanic would remain afloat. Now she was 4 days in her maiden voyage. She was leaving from Southampton en route to New York City, taking a lot of people to America. And like I said, she was carrying 2,200 people on board, and of those people, only 705 people made it. 1,502 people were killed. And the reason why the ship sank was that during the main voyage, Titanic was getting ice warnings just a couple of days before the night of April 14th, and you see, it's really complicated because everybody thinks it was just the iceberg that led to the sinking. There was a long list of events that led to the sinking of the ship, and it would be impossible to cover all of them in one recording. But one of the main reasons the ship sank was just, too much faith in technology, because everybody was convinced that the worst things could happen to the ship and she wouldn't sink. Like the wire telegraph operator was getting ice warnings, and this information was not given to the captain, which was a major flaw, because they had warnings the day before, and if he had seen those warnings, he could have charted the ship on a better course. But now we'll never know if that would have worked or not. I mean, it's just a what if scenario. And the iceberg was spotted on the night of April 14th, 1912. It was around 11:40 at night. Some people were still up partying, but a good majority had went to bed by this point. Now, there's a lot of things you have to think about the night that this incident happened. There was no moon. You just had the night sky, and Titanic's lights weren't that bright. And the lookouts had really no light source. The sea was calm. No waves, nothing, just pure silence. And around 11:42 p.m., they start noticing this black outline of this giant object moving closer and closer towards them. And that's when they realize it's an iceberg, so they call the bridge to tell them, iceberg right ahead. And then Officer Murdoch orders the ship to make a massive left turn, but unfortunately, it was too late. If they had spotted the iceberg literally just a few more minutes earlier, the ship would have missed it by pure inches, but they ended up sideswiping the iceberg, and it scraped up against the Titanic's hull, and it busted the top of the rivets off that was holding the metal together. And the iceberg ended up tearing open the first 5 boiler room compartments. And remember what I was saying earlier, only the first 4 could be breached. This one breached 5. One past its design point, her design. So the minute this happened, Thomas Andrews, who was the lead designer of the ship, he was on the ship the night the incident happened, and he brought the blueprints with him, and he revealed to Captain Smith and the other officers that the ship is doomed. And I calculate that we have at least an hour or two before she's at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And they had pumps. Like, they tried pumping the water out, but it was only buying them just a little more time. Like, the pumps were just delaying the inevitable, And now we get to the second design flaw of the ship. There wasn't enough lifeboats on the ship for everybody. So the reason for this, there wasn't proper lifeboat laws yet. And crazy enough, after the Titanic incident, a law was passed that every ship from this point forward is to carry enough lifeboats for everybody. So I'm glad at the very least that, some good came from this, but, it was way too big of a cost. But anyway, there wasn't enough boats on there for everybody because the designers felt that if they had enough boats on there for everybody, the decks would have been very crowded and there wouldn't have been enough room, for people to walk around and enjoy the day. So they made the call not to have enough boats on there for everybody. And as I mentioned earlier, only 705 people had made it, and 1,502 people were killed. And here's the second part: the boats were not loaded correctly. Each individual Titanic lifeboat could carry up to 70 people if it was loaded correctly. The crew did not have any proper training, or they didn't do any mock run-throughs to show people how to load them correctly. You got to remember, the night that all this is going down, everybody is in pure panic mode. It is pure chaos on the deck. People are scrambling, trying to get to their loved ones, trying to grab some of their items to take with them, and they're trying to get on a boat. Like, it's like every person for themselves at this point. And if the boats had been loaded correctly, only 1,000 people would have been killed. Like 500 more people could have been saved if the boats had been loaded correctly. That's why I wish the officers had trained everybody, you know, to show them, okay, in the event if something happens, this is how you load the boats correctly. But that's just another little flaw that could have saved more lives. But the boat should have been carrying enough boats for everybody. And the fact that it wasn't just absolutely blows my mind. But like I said, they had so much faith that the ship could take on anything. And the ship it took about 2 hours for the ship to sink, and during the sinking, the telegraph operator was able to contact a ship by the name of the Carpathia, who was full steam ahead en route to Titanic's location, but it's going to take 4 hours. Titanic has less than 2 hours before she disappears, so the survivors, they're kind of screwed at this point. And that's going to bring me to the next horrifying part. Most of the people that were killed that night froze to death in the Atlantic waters, because when the ship went down, everybody was in the water with their life preservers on, just screaming, and you know, everybody's out in the distance in the lifeboats, and they're too scared to go back to get survivors. So think about this. All the people in the boats are just sitting there listening as over 1,500 people are screaming into the night as they freeze to death. The water that night was negative 2.2 degrees Celsius. And just to give you an idea on how cold this water was, so here is the best case scenario for you as a normal survivor. If you had your vest on and you're in that water, you have 15 minutes. You have 15 minutes before that water numbs your arms and blood flow leaves your arms, and it goes and it retracts back to the heart to protect it. Because when your body goes through so much stress like that, it goes into survival mode. So each person had at least 15 minutes before they started freezing to death, and that's what happened. Most of them froze to death in the water, and it's really horrifying, you know, to think about. You know, it's terrible. And all the survivors of that night have all passed away. The last survivor was a lady named Melvina Dean, and she was only a couple months old the night the ship sank. She was actually recorded as the youngest passenger on the ship, and she was the last survivor to die. She passed away on May 31st, 2009. My late grandmother, Dusty, she actually gave me a newspaper that had her death announced on the front, on the top corner of the front page, and I still own it till this very day. And I know all those people probably suffered severe PTSD from that night for the rest of their lives, you know. And my condolences go out to all these people who perished that night. You know, it's so horrible. You know, it's what I was going back to earlier. This is not a good story. You know, it's sad. All these people were so excited to get to the U.S. and start new lives, only for this to happen. You know, it's horrible. It really is. And there's a lot of things that need to be learned, you know, from this incident. And it's hard to believe, it's been 110 years since this incident, and it's still being talked about by so many people. There's so many museums that just cover the history, And to go back to the survivors for a minute, I have some data here that I just learned about not too long ago that absolutely baffled me. Think about this for a minute, okay? So the Titanic had 3 classes for all the passengers that were on board. You had 3 levels. You had the very bottom level, which was third-class passengers, who were the poorest. You have second class, who was in the middle of the ship, so they were a little richer. And then you had the top floor of the ship, which was first class. That was where all the very rich people were. 76% of the third-class passengers perished that night. 58% of second class perished, and 39% of first class perished. So they wouldn't admit this, but a good portion of the survivors were saved because of how much they were carrying in their wallet or purses, whatever. And that, to me, it was so baffling that people, like, a human life is worth more than any amount of money. And I cannot believe people were saved based on how much money they were carrying. That is horrible, man. My heart goes out to all the survivors, especially the people in the lower classes. Like, that is horrible. Can you imagine judging a human life based on how much money they're carrying? Like, that is just so horrible. I can't even put that into words. Like, that is just baffling to me. And one more bit of history before we get into the actual film. So Titanic took about at least 2 hours to sink, and a little fact for you, the night she hit the iceberg, a lot of people actually opened up their porthole windows to see what happened. And if all those windows had been closed, I think I saw somewhere the survivors would have bought themselves another hour, but it wouldn't have made a difference because the Carpathia still wouldn't have made it to them in time. But if Titanic's windows had all been closed, it would have taken an extra hour for her to sink. And the other thing, here's another very crucial part of information that actually wasn't confirmed until the wreck was found. So Titanic sank on the night of April 14th, 1912. She struck the iceberg at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, and then the ship fully submerged into the Atlantic waters around 2:30 a.m. on April 15th. During the sinking, around 2 a.m., when the ship was over halfway through the water, the stern section the ship broke in half because the back got so high up in the air, it broke and it fell back down into the water. Then the two pieces would eventually separate, and then a good minutes passed, and then the stern section slipped beneath the waters. And most of the survivor testimonies say that the ship sunk whole, and the breakup was only talked about from a couple of survivors. So from this point, everybody thought that the ship sank whole. It wasn't until Dr. R. Ballard and his team discovered the wreck in September of 1985 that they confirmed that the wreck did in fact break into two pieces. The bow and the stern have a significant distance away from each other, and the stern section at the time was completely unrecognizable. Whatever happened to the stern section on its way down to the Atlantic seafloor, when it hit the seafloor, it just blew apart. You can barely recognize it, and the bow's in pretty good shape. But as of today, the wreck is in very horrible shape. A team actually went back to the wreck site very recently, and they estimate within the next 30 years, the wreck's going to be gone permanently, because there is this bacteria that's eating the ship away, and they estimate within a good 30 years, the wreck's going to be completely gone. And the only thing that's going to be left are its propellers, because they were built out of stainless steel, and so the bacteria can't eat that. So the propellers will be there permanently. And I think it would actually be pretty cool if someday we could actually go down to the wreck site and actually recover the propellers. That'd be a nice, good find for a museum. There's actually a museum somewhere that actually owns a giant wall section of the ship. It was recovered in the mid '90s, and it was brought up by a team using balloons, and it raised it back up to the surface, which I think was pretty cool. So that's really the basic history for you regarding the incident. And now that brings us into the actual film. So you could say that the Titanic film was really a huge passion project for director James Cameron. Like, I did some digging. He made 72 deep submarine dives, including 33 to Titanic, logging more hours on that ship than Captain Smith himself. Of these dives, 51 were in Russian submarines to depths up to 16,000 feet. He studied the entire wreck site to make sure that he got it right. He went over all the history, every little detail, every survivor. He wanted to make sure that this movie was as close to the real thing as you could possibly be. And I'm telling you right now, I rewatched Titanic for the very first time in about 15 years just yesterday. I'm telling you, 25 years later, this movie holds up extremely well. I loved it. And the way it does an amazing job of respecting Titanic's history was so amazing. And I like what this film does. So our main characters in this, but before I do that, let's talk about the cast for a minute. And I'm only going to, there is a lot of actors in this movie, so I'm only going to name off a good portion of our main characters. So first up, we have the legendary actress Kate Winslet, who plays one of the main characters. Her name is Rose. And up next, of course, we have legendary actor Leonardo DiCaprio, who plays Jack Dawson, who is the second main character in this. And then we have Billy Zane, who plays Catelyn Hockley, and this character is Rose's fiance. Up next, we have Kathy Bates, who plays Margaret Brown, who was a real life survivor of the ship. And then we have the late great Bill Paxton, who played Brock Lovett. And Brock Lovett is the man in charge of the expedition team that we see at the beginning of the film exploring the Titanic wreck as they're trying to find a safe with some stuff inside of it. And what they're after, we don't know yet. But we find out soon enough. And then up next, we have the late great Gloria Stewart, who played modern times Rose. So she plays very old Rose when the team is interviewing her, trying to figure out what happened to the giant diamond that they're trying to find. And then Rose tells them her whole story about how she got on the ship and how she met Jack and her whole experience of surviving the sinking. She's our main narrator throughout the entire film, and we hear her say stuff throughout the entire film. And lastly, we have Victor Garber, who played Thomas Andrews. And that's really the main cast for this film. Like I said, this film has one of the biggest casts I've ever seen. It would be impossible to get through all of them, but that's really the gist of the main lineup for this film. And now we're going to get into the actual story, so let's go. So the movie opens up with Bill Paxton's character and his expedition team riding in submarines around Titanic's wreck site because they are after this giant blue diamond called Heart of the Sea, and apparently they believe its last location was placed inside a safe the night Titanic sank. And they find the safe, they bring it up to the surface, and they open it up, and the diamond is not in there. But of the valuables that they find this mysterious drawing of a naked lady laying on the couch with the very diamond they're looking for around, she's wearing it around her neck, and Bill's team decides to show pictures of it to news stations, trying to see if anybody will know who this lady is. And old Rose sees this on television, and she contacts the team to fly her over there, and they take her over to the ship, and then the rest of the movie is her retelling her story of her experience on the ship. And that's really the whole film, is just her recounting. And then we see young Rose, played by Kate Winslet, as she's getting out of her fancy car with her mom and her fiance, getting ready to board the ship in Southampton. And right off the bat, man, the film gets you ready with emotional punches, because the movie opens up, we see black and white footage of the ship leaving Southampton, and everybody is so happy and excited, not knowing what's going to happen 4 days later. It's so sad. And you hear some of the theme music playing. It's just right off the bat, man, the movie is trying to prep you. It's I was not ready for this. Just rewatching it again, man, this film destroyed me a little bit. It was hard to get through this because just, like I said, it's really sad. And of course, we all know the story of, Jack and Rose meeting and their big love story. And for me, okay, look, I like them together. I really do. I think Rose was the best character throughout this whole film. I think it's so cool watching her break out of this shell and she becomes her own person thanks to Jack's help. And I love the scene on when they meet for the very first time, where Rose is getting ready to jump off the stern because she's done with her life. She hates living this rich lifestyle. She feels trapped. And Jack has to help talk her out of it, and then that's how they meet. And then I love the scene later on where Jack shows her his drawings and everything. But the thing that I just found so confusing, it's can you really find the man that you love in 4 days? You got to remember, the film takes place over the span of 4 days. And by the time that Titanic hits the iceberg, these two are acting like they've known each other for years. When in fact, they've only known each other for 4 days. I'm this is the fastest love story I've ever seen. I guess you kind of have to expand your disbelief a little bit on that, but I still like the chemistry between them nonetheless. And Cameron wanted them to represent, Rose, she was supposed to represent, what the survivors felt, which was survival's guilt. And then Jack, when he was killed at the end of the film, he was supposed to represent everybody that perished that night. And of course, we all know the red flag of the film, how her and Jack could have easily both fit on that door. So a little backstory for you. At the end of the movie, when all the survivors are in the water, Jack and Rose swim for a little bit, and they find a floating door, and they both try to climb on it, but after one attempt, the door starts to go sideways, so Jack helps Rose climb on top of it, and then Jack just decides to sit in the water, and he freezes to death, and then Rose lets him go, and then we just watch Jack's body disappear into the ocean below, and it's really terrifying. He just disappears into the darkness, and it's horrifying, but he was supposed to represent, everybody that was killed that night, and the Mythbusters actually tested that Rose and Jack both could have easily fit on the door. It would have been tricky, but they could have fit. And people had been debating this ever since the film came out. I'm pretty sure it's still talked about. I saw this funny meme once where this lady drew out a chalk outline of the door, and I guess her and her friend did different poses on the door, showing how Rose and Jack could have both fit on the door. And I think I even saw someone say once, why didn't they take turns? Okay, Rose sits on it for a while, then she'll get off and sit in the water for a little bit and let Jack rest on it for a little bit. At the very least, if they'd done that possibly could have worked too. But we'll never know. But Jack's death is supposed to be the big point of the film, and he needed to die to represent that. That's what That's what I've read anyways. But the story itself overall is amazing, and I love what James Cameron did with this. Like when we see the story going on with our fictional characters, because in real life Jack and Rose didn't exist. They were made up for the film, but everybody else, like we see the real people on the sidelines, like for example, when Titanic strikes the iceberg, we see a man named Jack and his brother walk outside, and they're like, "What happened? We just missed it." Like that was a real eyewitness testimony, because this guy named Jack actually survived the incident. Him and his brother and other family were on the ship, and Jack was the only one who made it. And him and his brother went out on deck right after the collision happened. So it's like, when we see the scenes of Jack and Rose, we see the real people on the sidelines doing what they were doing in their testimony. Like, there's this very famous picture of this little boy playing with this toy on the deck of Titanic, and there's this really brilliant scene where Jack is walking on the deck, and if you pay attention to a scene where he's walking by this kid playing with the toy, it was literally a recreation of the famous photograph. And I loved that attention to detail. Like, that was so cool, and the next phase I guess I'll go into is the attention to detail this film has. Like, one of my favorite scenes in this is when we get to see inside the engine room. And what's really cool is James Cameron actually filmed inside a real ship. So he found a ship that had engines that looked very similar to the ones Titanic used. And what he did was, when he shot the footage of all the actors walking around them, he actually used CG to shrink them so it would make the engines look way bigger than what they really were. It's one of those little tricks that you can do now thanks to good old CG. And dude, the visuals of the ship, when the scenes of the ship when it's docked in Southampton, you see the city and everybody boarding it. Oh, dude, it's like you're actually there. It's so breathtaking. I can't even begin to imagine like how long it must have taken to build that set. Like, that was crazy. And the visuals for this film are breathtaking. Like, dude, one of my favorite visual shots is Titanic going out into the Atlantic Ocean with the lights on and the sun's going down, and she's riding out into the sunset. And that is in my opinion, was one of the most beautiful shots in the entire film. Like, the shots of the ship just sailing out at sea. Like, one of my favorite visual moments is where the ship is sailing and Captain Smith orders the ship to go faster. He says, "Let's stretch your legs." And you have the beautiful music playing, just showing you how breathtaking this beautiful ship is. And we see Jack and his friend run out to the very front of the bow, and they climb up onto the railing, and Jack yells, "I'm the king of the world." It's just, it was so amazing. And while the visuals are amazing, unfortunately, the scenes with the CG actors walking around on deck or walking around the engines is a little dated. You watch it now in high definition, you can really tell, that they're not actually there. But I mean, other than that, I think the CG effects actually hold up very, very well. And another attention to detail that I really liked was that we see the lifeboat that Miss Brown is in, and she actually orders the officer in that boat to go back and look for survivors. And this actually gave her the nickname the Unsinkable Molly Brown, because she ordered the officer to take the boat back and get survivors. And I don't know if they rescued anybody. I think they may have, but it was a really brave thing of her to do. And I love that. And there was a scene that was deleted from this film that should have been kept in my opinion. And this is a very historical accuracy moment. So another main reason Titanic hit the iceberg is because I was talking about earlier, the telegraph operator was not taking the ice warnings very seriously. And a few hours before the incident happened, a ship near them warned them about incoming ice. And the telegrapher at the time was very busy doing other things. and he got frustrated. So he told that ship basically to, stay out, shut up, I'm working. And if he had listened to that ice warning, history may have occurred way differently. And they recounted this whole incident so perfectly. And I cannot believe they cut this. Like, it was after that moment, Titanic's fate was sealed. And they should have kept it in. And while we're on the iceberg, one of my favorite scenes in this film is the collision sequence. Just because with how just serious and crazy it is. Because like the minute the iceberg is spotted, the intense music kicks in, and Murdoch has to make a last-minute effort to try to save the ship. Like he orders the engines to fully stop and go in reverse so that the ship slows down and have it turn, left. So you're watching, like, it's going between the different rooms. Like it's going from the bridge to the engine room to the coal bunkers. They're shutting the engines off, trying to save her at the last minute. Like, everybody is scrambling everywhere, trying to hurry and get the engines to go in reverse as quickly as possible. And you're sitting there, like, the ship's going to hit, but you're biting your nails. You're just like, okay, is she going to miss? She might miss it. It's like you have this little bit of hope that the ship is going to miss it, but we all know what happens. And I love the attention to detail when the ship is scraping the iceberg, like the rooms in front of the ship are shaking, which is showing a sign that the ship is hitting something. And, oh man, that whole sequence was breathtaking and very top tier definition of very intense. And the next scenes I want to talk about are the ones that really terrified me. So there are scenes in this film that I'll never forget watching when I was a kid that absolutely horrified me, and it left a big impact on me. And the first one was Captain Smith's death. So nobody knows what happened to Captain Smith. Some people speculate because apparently the last time Smith was seen, he was on the bridge. So it's left a lot of people speculating that he went down with the ship. But other witnesses say they saw him and Thomas Andrews jump into the water, never to be seen again. So we'll never really know what happened, but they both did perish that night. Now, whether they went down with the ship or not, we don't know. But in Cameron's take, Smith goes down with the ship. Like, his whole death scene was so heartbreaking because this isn't a fun fact, but Titanic was going to be Captain Smith's last voyage before retirement. He was in his early 60s, and like he was regarded as one of the best captains at the time. And people knew they were in safe hands when they had Captain Smith as their captain. And like he knew the seas. He was a very good captain. And just watching him go, like a lady walks up asking him for help. She's carrying her baby, and he has no idea what to say to her, and he just walks off, and he feels so ashamed of himself for allowing this to happen. He walks into the bridge as it's filling up with water, and he latches the door shut. And then the next time we see him, the bridge is now fully submerged under the water, and then the windows break and the water fills the room up, and he goes down with the ship. And it's so heartbreaking, and that is a rule of the sea, actually, is that captains go down with their ship. I don't know how many places follow that, but that's a thing in a lot of places around the world. It's I don't know what you would call it, but it's something that a lot of people believe in, I guess. But it's really sad. And the next one this is the one that really affected me. And it's the scene where we see this mother tucking her two kids to bed while the ship's sinking. And they were a part of the third class passengers. And she's tucking them to bed knowing they're going to die. And like, dude, that scene absolutely destroyed me. I'll never forget seeing that when I was a kid. That haunted my dreams for a good many months. The mother was played by actress Jeanette Goldstein, and I actually met her back in the summer of 2021. I got to go to the Flashback convention weekend at in Chicago. It was a horror convention because Jeanette starred in one of my favorite movies of all time called Aliens, which was also directed by James Cameron, and she also played the stepmom in Terminator 2, which was also directed by James Cameron. And I'll never forget meeting her at her table. And I told her, like, listen, like when I watched Titanic, that scene when you tuck the kids to bed absolutely destroyed me, you know? And it's like, it was so weird getting to tell her that, you know? It's just like, I cannot express to you like how crazy it is to meet someone you've been watching in a TV screen for like how many years. Getting to meet her was a very surreal experience. And I'm telling you right now, if you ever get a chance to meet Jeanette, take it. She is a beautiful human being, and she treats all of her fans like family. She is an incredible person. I actually have my picture with her up in my dorm room. Like, I use that for bragging rights all the time. She is amazing. I'm so honored that I got a chance to meet her. But yeah, that scene of her character tucking the kids to bed absolutely terrified me. And now we're going to get to number 3, and this one also destroyed me. And this one is actually another deleted scene that I'm actually happy it got deleted, because this scene is kind of went to the, okay, that was too far. We don't need to see that kind of thing. And it goes like this. We all remember the famous scene. So after Jack and Rose go to the fancy dinner with Rose's fiance, supposed fiance and her mom, and it was supposed to show that, these rich people have no idea how to have fun. Like, that whole scene is miserable. Like, they're all just sitting there. It's boring. And then Jack wants to show Rose what a real party is. So they go all the way down to third class, where all the passengers are having this giant party with live music. They're drinking, having an absolute blast. And there's a few scenes where Jack dances with this little girl, and he tells her that when Jack switches and starts dancing with Rose, he tells the little girl, like, don't you worry, you'll always be my best girl, and she smiles at him, and it's a really cute scene. And, little me would often wondered, what happened to that little girl? Well, there is a deleted scene in this film where her and her parents drown. It's right before, the breakup scene happens. A little before that, they're going through a hallway as it fills up with water, and the hallway's gated closed, and the dad's yelling, open the gate, and then we see the water continue to rise, and we hear the little girl start to scream, and then it just cuts. I wish I could unsee that scene, because I have this problem where it's like, I can't watch children get hurt or killed on screen. I can't do it. It's too much for me to handle. Like, to give you another example, the most infamous scene in Schindler's List, where we see the little girl in red, we see her body on top of the cart when it's being dragged over to be dumped with the other pile of bodies that's being burned. The minute I saw that scene, I had to pause the movie and take like a 5-minute break, because that was way too much for me to handle. Like, I can't do it, man. It destroys me when I see kids get hurt or killed on screen. It's too much. I physically cannot watch that. It's just way too much. But those are the 3 scenes that really, really got to me. And here's one that outright horrified me. It was a scene where one of the boats goes back to look for survivors, and by this point, they've waited too long. Like, the boat is just going through a sea of dead bodies. Like, everybody is just laying there frozen, and then, like, they look like those dummies you'd see in a mall with the fake with the clothes on, like those rubber dummy people that you see. That's what they looked like. They were all just pure white. They had ice growing from them, like they were all frozen. And we see a shot of a dead mom holding her baby in the water. It's just like, oh my gosh, man. Oh, it was so bad, It's just, it's horrible. And the fact that you're reminded that actually happened, it's just, oh, man. That was a lot. And so those are really the scenes that really got to me. And to get back to the story for a minute, there was so overall, there was only one problem I had with this film, and it was the ending. Now, I may get into kind of a rant here, but okay, so the movie ends like this. Rose retells her entire story, and her and the other crew members have probably been sitting inside that room for probably hours at this point, and she still doesn't tell them where the diamond is. So that whole thing was completely pointless. So they all just give up, and then they all go to bed. Rose gets up in the middle of the night. Okay, she walks up on deck of the explorer ship. She climbs up on the railing and she pulls the diamond out of her pocket. She had it the entire time. And then we get a quick flashback scene of her on the Carpathia, and because her fiance gave her a coat, not knowing that the jewel was in that coat's pocket. So she pulls it out of her pocket. So that explains, okay, she had it the entire time, and then she just drops it into the water. And I'm just like, okay, Rose, first of all, you do realize these guys have probably had to pay a good amount of money to make this expedition happen. Like, they have been searching. Like Bill Paxton's character has dedicated his life to find this jewel, and you just dropped it into the water. What was the reason behind it? Like, I don't get that. Like, yeah, nothing like telling a story that lasted 2 hours, not to tell them, oh yeah, by the way, guys, here's your jewel. I'm going to go drop it in the water now. It's like, what? It's just... And on top of that, it's just like, when Jack dies, like, Rose makes a promise that he's never going to let him go and that she's going to continue to live her life for him. And she promises him that they will meet again. And then that's when Jack dies. And it's just like, so Rose, let me get this straight. You're going to keep this 80-year-old promise to a guy that you knew for 4 days. Like, are you serious? And here's where we get into the main problem I have with the ending. So we find out that, after the incident, Rose married, had children. She had a very beautiful life. She had grandchildren, great-grandchildren. She was married for probably a good 60 to 70 years. And her husband passed away before the events of the film. And the movie ends with her. So here's my interpretation. And a lot of people agree. This is how it ends. So the last shot we see is the sad music playing. We see pictures of her throughout her life going on adventures. And we see old her laying in bed, and it looks like she's not breathing anymore. And it looks like old her passed away. And then the camera pans back down to the Titanic wreck, and then the ship fixes itself, looks brand new again, and Rose enters heaven. And her heaven is the grand staircase of the Titanic. All the survivors are there waiting for her, like all the people who perished that night. They're all in the room waiting. The butler opens the door. She walks in. She's young again, and Jack is waiting for her next to the clock at the grand staircase. She walks up wearing a wedding dress, and the two of them start kissing. Then all the other people start cheering for them, and then the movie ends. So that's basically Rose entering her heaven to be with Jack for all eternity. So, and apparently in some readings, heaven is supposed to be your happiest moment in your life. And apparently when Rose met Jack, when Rose and Jack shared those moments in the grand staircase, that was some of her happy moments. So, Rose, I have a few questions for you. So let me wrap my head around this. So you're telling me that your happiest moments of your life was with a guy that you knew for 4 days on a ship that sank and you almost died. You're telling me your happiest moments are with this guy that you knew for 4 days, not with your husband that you spent 60, 70 plus years with, who you had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren with. You're telling me that none of those 6 decades were not your happy years at all? I feel so bad for Rose's, husband. Can you imagine he's sitting there waiting in the afterlife waiting for her, and she's just like, oh yeah, sorry honey, I want to go spend my afterlife with a guy that I knew for 4 days on Titanic. Goodbye. I'm just like, are you serious? Like, what the heck, Rose? Like, are you serious? That has baffled me ever since I was a kid. I even made a Facebook post about this like a couple years ago. It's just like, what? Like, that's pretty gangster of you, Rose. I cannot believe you'd do something like that. But yeah, that's my rant, on that. It's just like, that makes no sense to me. But nonetheless, I still like this movie a lot. And to go back to the filmmaking for a minute, some of the scenes that really took my breath away was the sinking sequences. Like, if you watch the behind the scenes of them filming the scenes of the ship sinking, it is absolutely insane. Like, the one that blew my mind was like, they actually built the grand staircase room and filled it up with water with all real people. It's just like, dude, that is the real thing. Like, they actually flooded rooms, recreated. Like, it was intense. Like, dude, that is like as close to the real thing as you could possibly be. Like, you need to look at the behind the scenes footage. It is absolutely nuts the lengths they went to make sure that they got the history as close to the real thing as humanly possible. And another thing that I love about this film, again, it respects the history so much. And the parts that really got me, here's another scene that really haunted me, was the band. So Titanic had a band on the ship, right? It was a 4-person band, and they were on the deck playing music while the ship was sinking. And they played music throughout the entire sinking, and all 4 of them went down with the ship, and they were branded as heroes. And the movie accurately portrays them perfectly. Like, we hear them playing music and we see a montage of like this old couple laying in bed holding each other as their room fills up with water. We get the scene of the mom tucking her kids to bed. And then we get the scenes of other survivors trying to get up on deck, but they're trapped in rooms with the water, rising. It's terrifying, man. It's heartbreaking. But the scenes were so accurate. This movie is honestly terrifying just with the fact on how accurate it is. Like, Cameron, again, did such an amazing job of recreating the story. And thanks to this film, I don't think Titanic's ever going to be forgotten. The passengers and all the history are going to be remembered for many generations to come. And I will forever be grateful to Cameron that he made this movie. And one last thing that I want to talk about is that this film actually did stir up a little bit of controversy just because there is a scene where Officer Murdoch actually shoots 2 passengers because when everybody was scrambling trying to get on a boat, Captain Smith ordered women and children first, and a lot of the men were trying to, bombard the officers and get into a boat, and a lot of them actually ended up having to pull out revolvers to keep things under control. And there's a scene where Murdoch shoots 2 passengers and he feels ashamed of himself, and then he shoots himself in the head. And the Murdoch family were very angry that Murdoch was portrayed like that on screen because apparently to them that was very inaccurate. And the only reason I think that the scene was created because apparently some eyewitness accounts say they heard gunshots near the position where Murdoch was at. And the family did not like how Murdoch was portrayed. And James Cameron actually had to go apologize to the family for how he portrayed Murdoch on screen. But that was really about it. I mean, that was all the controversy really was. Just that, there were some things that he had to change up, just for the film and to make things a little more dramatic. And, sometimes you have to do that, like, You can't. I think it's physically impossible to adapt, a real life event or a tragedy 100% accurately without having to change some things because it's a film and you have to adapt the history as best you can, but you have to keep it interesting as well, otherwise people are not going to be interested in it. But nonetheless, that is all my talking points for the covering of the famous film Titanic. I hope that you all enjoyed this recording, and thank you so much for helping me reach 50 episodes. To everybody who has listened to my show up until this point, all I have is the biggest thanks to you. You've made this dream of mine a reality, and I could not have done it without you. I thank all of you for your amazing support. I love you all, and just thank you so much for giving my show a chance, and I hope that you enjoy this recording. And cheers to 50 episodes. Thank you so much. You have an excellent day and live an excellent life. And until next time, I am DJ Apollo, and you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film.